At the time of making this video, there are only 81 episodes of Rick and Morty. A lot of these episodes have been praised over the years for how well they are made, and how some of them completely redefine what a cartoon show is capable of. In the TV industry, when an episode of a show is considered to be one of the best ever made, there's a chance that it could be nominated for an Emmy Award. Rick and Morty, unsurprisingly, has been nominated for 4 Emmy Awards. And now, if you place these episodes on a chart, you'll notice that they are very highly rated, all being over a 9.0 on IMDb. These episodes stand out as some of the most iconic and well-written episodes in the series. Except, this is only 3 of the 4 episodes, because way down here, far away from the rest, is Season 6, Episode 4, Night Family. Now, how does an episode like this, one so low rated compared to the others, get nominated for an Emmy? Well, that's because this episode is by far the most underrated episode of Rick and Morty. A statement like that sounds like a stretch, but when a show with 15 episodes rated 9 or higher only gets 3 of those nominated, and the other nominated episode is significantly lower rated, clearly the critics see something that fans don't. With that being said, I think that there's so much this episode does right that people just choose to ignore. So I'm going to try my best to shine some light on one of Rick and Morty's best episodes that most of its fan base would just write off as mid. First off, Rick and Morty is no stranger when it comes to making fantastic songs for their episodes. However, in terms of soundtrack and overall tone of music, this episode nailed it at every possible angle. The soundtrack made by Ryan Elder is one of the most mesmerizing the show has ever seen, especially with how it perfectly fits the grainy, more horror-centric vibe of this episode. That theme is a major thing I wanted to talk about. This episode breaks the norms of what a Rick and Morty episode is. To this date, it's the only Rick and Morty episode that takes the typical sci-fi theme of the show and flips it into a full-on horror show. The episode began with an eerie tone following Beth, and tension quickly ramps up throughout the entire episode. The writing of this episode as a horror-style episode is just incredible, and that's only one of the reasons it got nominated for an Emmy. However, that exact point is one of the main reasons why fans don't seem to like this episode. Rick and Morty fans seem to like change the least out of most fandoms. They didn't like the show's spin-offs, and they sure didn't like the change of casting after Justin Roiland was fired. In this instance, Rick and Morty branched off to the point that they entered an entirely new genre for one episode and came out with an Emmy nomination, and that was only possible because of how good this episode really is. Most episodes usually star around an A plot and a B plot. This is very common in almost every piece of film out there. In Rick and Morty and other shows about a large cast of characters, this allows the writers to explore multiple different angles of a story, or even have 2 stories going at once. Another big part of this is making sure that the plots have room to breathe. A lot of the time, a show focused on one specific story becomes too boring for the viewer, and usually it feels like it's been milked dry. But the difference is that a good writer can take that longer space and turn their story into a masterpiece. Night Family is one of very few Rick and Morty episodes that follow only one plot. Most notably, the Vat of Acid episode of Rick and Morty focuses purely on Morty and his own journey of self-discovery. This episode was adored by both critics and fans alike, and it actually became the second Rick and Morty episode to win an Emmy. The one storyline tropes like Night Family and the Vat of Acid episode are few and far between, but when done right, it can take what could have been 2 sloppily written, unrelated stories and instead become a perfectly flowing icon of an episode. Of course, the quality and individuality of this writing is not fully what makes this episode great. It's also helped by the little things, not only the music, but also the type of story it features. I personally think that Rick and Morty episodes that follow the whole family are amazing, and that's done so well here. Jerry becomes the unlikely hero at first, and Summer is the main villain. At least Night Summer is. The introduction of the Night Family gave the episode so much life because not only do you get a story centered around the whole family, you get to see all the roles flip like never before. Now, this episode thankfully isn't just a good story ruined by Rick's crippling alcohol dependency making everybody miserable. Instead, the whole family is miserable. Even the villains themselves are miserable by the end. Season 6 was one of the best in a long time because it brought back that season-long theme of growth and development, something we haven't seen in a long time. One of my favorite parts of Season 6 is how the whole family is involved in almost every episode. Not only that, but Jerry is pretty much the main character in half of the episodes in this season. Jerry has always been my favorite, so the fact that Night Family can take away his typical unintelligent and butt-of-the-joke act and turn him into a lovable hero is amazing. The relationship between Jerry and his night person shows a very big distinction between him and the rest of the family. Rick and Morty use their night person to work for them, and they nearly push them to their limit. Beth and Summer force their counterparts to learn new and challenging skills for them, and they all abuse their night selves by making them do basic things that they are too lazy to do themselves, like washing their own dishes. If it wasn't for them treating the Night family like slaves, then they would have never even revolted against the Day family. Night Summer was more than glad to do the Day family's dishes if they could at least make the job easier for her. Of course, Rick, being who he is, thought that that was unacceptable, so he went through great lengths just to not give the Night family what they wanted. Jerry is the only one to treat his Night person as an individual and give him equal respect.
Jerry, this isn't how you're supposed to use a Night person.
Jerry again gets made fun of for his laid-back approach to his Night person, but that's what saves him and the entire family in the end. Jerry's pure compassion has always been shown in the show, especially when it comes to his family and the people he loves. Back in season 5, when Jerry sees a group of people mistreated by Rick, he takes them under his wing and proves their real value. Jerry even got granted a divine staff that made him more powerful than Rick at the moment, and he didn't use it for his own benefit, but instead to get back with his wife. One of the most interesting parts about Night Family isn't even the horror element, it's what the episode is actually saying about control. Rick is someone who has to always be in control of everything at all times. He controls portals to other universes, entire timelines, and even governments. So the idea that there's another version of himself operating without his permission immediately bothers him. The Night versions of the family aren't evil in a traditional sense. They aren't trying to take over the world. They just want respect and fair treatment. And that's where the episode really gets good. Since during the day, Rick treats the Night family like tools, the entire conflict starts because Rick refuses to rinse a dish. Rick refuses to compromise on something small because admitting he's wrong would mean losing control. And Rick losing control is something he physically cannot handle. The whole episode is like a war between different versions of the same people. And that is very on brand for Rick and Morty, because the show is constantly pushing in our faces ideas that the worst enemy you'll ever face is yourself. The tension is done so well with the horror tone throughout the episode. The lighting is darker, the music is more intense, the animation style shifts slightly, and the Night characters are slower and more unsettling. It almost feels like a completely different show at times. Because of this, it doesn't really feel like a throwaway episode, but instead it feels like something that genuinely changes the dynamic of the show. Overall, this episode is very different from most Rick and Morty episodes, and because of that, fans are too quickly to label it as a bad episode without even taking the time to realize and acknowledge the depth and brilliance that this episode has in store. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys think about this episode, and thank you guys so much for the support already. Let me know if there's any Rick and Morty things that you want me to cover in a future video, and subscribe if you haven't already.